this presentation out by asking questions. I do want to give a warning that this presentation is going to talk about mental illness and suicide. If you feel comfortable answering this question, just raise your hand. If you do not feel comfortable, you do not need to raise your hand. But my first question is, how many of you know somebody who has tried to kill themselves? Please raise your hand. Okay, how many of you know someone who tried to kill themselves who is under the age of 18? All right, I just want us to look around. That's way too many hands. So that's my purpose. I am a high school English teacher, like you heard. You're going to see some pictures of students, it's okay, that have been approved to be in the presentation. But this is my class last year. These were my sophomores. And in this picture, you're going to see, us being silly. You're going to see funny faces, laughter, smiles. But what you don't see is the crying. You don't see the anxiety attacks, the panic attacks, the depression, and the students who told me that they wanted to end their lives. You don't see the disappointment and the lack of trust they have in you after you report them to a counselor. And you don't see the relief a week later when they come back to school, when they realize that you were actually trying to help them. So with that, I originally wanted to create an anti-bullying course for an English class. I started doing that in undergrad. For a project, I wanted to expand it. But this year at my school, I was told I could not teach Dear Evan Hansen, which is a book that has a suicide in it. I was very upset by this, and it kind of got me discouraged in this capstone, so I changed my idea, because I don't feel like high schools are ready yet. I don't think we're ready to challenge this topic because of the fear. And the fear is not invalid. The fear is real and the fear is true. I have the fear too that, by talking about suicide and mental illness, you might convince a student to actually do it. But that's not the only fear that my school has. They also have fear of the community, right? The backlash and from the parents. So that was our last day of school. There are 22 students in this photo. I have only been a teacher for 2 full years. This is my 3rd year. The amount of students I've had in 2 years who told me they wanted to kill themselves, if they were successful, which luckily none of them have been, this is not the photo you would see. This is. Right? They're in the same class. So that is why I'm doing this topic, which is really important, but also a heavy topic to hear. So I told you that I was not allowed to teach Dear Evan Hansen this year. That upset me a lot because I felt like this was a great novel that I could teach my freshmen and sophomores. And I didn't feel like suicide was the only thing in this story, and that's what we were focused on. And it wasn't that it even got shut down. It got shut down immediately. There was no conversation about it. It was an automatic no. Now, I'm not a veteran teacher, but when I was at NKU in undergrad, I was a resident assistant. I was in charge of Norse Hall. We had to create multiple programs for our residents to go to. I wanted to have a 13 Reasons Why watch party with a conversation about mental illness and suicide warning signs, right? Housing shut me down. So I wasn't gonna let that happen though. So it took me 3 meetings with housing to get approved. I had talked to the wellness center more than 2 times to get a counselor to be on my side about it. But when I did this program, I found out a week later that one of my residents, by learning the warning signs, was able to save her friend's life. So with that, it was pretty successful. And again, you might think, why was a 21-year-old challenging somebody who's an expert in this field? And to that, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, right? I'm a young teacher. I don't know everything. I'm not in a psychology field. But what I will say is I am diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I know what it's like, right? I've cried on the Callahan floors in the bathroom having anxiety attacks. I just, during my master's program, dropped out of a class twice because I wasn't ready to do a presentation in that class. And so I know what it's like, and I know where the students are feeling. So with this, what did I actually do for my capstone? Well, I wanted to do something with mental illness, and I wanted to do something that would affect people now, not in the future, because I don't believe if I did that course, I would be able to teach it, at least at my current school. I didn't want to put all that work into it just to graduate. I want to do something after graduation. So I came up with a children's book series. So my first children's book that I was going to do just for this capstone, I was only going to do one. It's called The Dimming Light. That is a story about depression. Now, just some background on me is my writing style is not children's literature. I've never written a children's literature piece. I don't read children's literature. I don't have kids. So this was really challenging for me. But I want to do something with children because I feel like if we start at the bottom, we might have an easier way to get into that high school class. So if we start the next generation, maybe we can have that class I wanted to teach. And so I decided to use depression because I have depression, and I started with that. So this is the dimming light. It's called a jack-o'-lantern, and he realizes that his light is dimming. And he goes on a journey with his friends to try to stop his light from going out. And they realize after their first trial that his light is reflective of his emotions. And so they go through different trials, which are different types of therapy, until they get to the end of the story. And he's not fixed, like it doesn't get fixed, but he gets a little bit better. But because I have some type of crazy life where I think I don't need sleep, I created a second book. So, we have another one. This one is focusing on anxiety, because again, I have that, so why not start with the things I know? And this one is about a snowman who is melting too quickly, so he gets really anxious about it. He's not scared of the pain of melting, but he's scared of missing out. He can't see Santa this year, he's gonna miss Christmas, and he's gonna miss the kids that made him. And so, the kids that make him help him go through different treatments to try to calm his anxiety. And so that's where you heard earlier that I created the People Like Me series. I'm focusing on mental illnesses, but I do plan on adding different lifestyles and identities along with some sensitivity readers. And so that's where that was. Because I'm not used to having to do independent projects like this, like big ones, I wanted to create phases for myself in order to try to stay on task. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all of those, but I will go through them as I go through the presentation. This is the timeline I didn't follow. I tried, but being a teacher full time and being newer, it was really rough. I tried to be done by November 30th, but I actually had a surgery on the 22nd as well. So I got done, a little bit later, a little too close to my presentation, but it was nice to look at this and see, a visual of where I should have been, whether I was there or not. So phase one, I wanted to try to look at the children's book structure, because I'm not used to that. I wanted to conduct interviews, have my first draft at least, go to some workshops I'll talk about in a minute, and then find my illustrator. And so I don't know if you guys know Hannah, but Hannah went to NKU. She's also Miss Kentucky, and she'll be going to the Miss America competition this year. But she actually has her own book called Hank the Horse and the Case of the Missing Eggs. So I wanted to reach out to her first because I wanted to see how she became successful. She's sold a lot of these books, and so she gave me a lot of good tips, but she also gave me some tips for my research. And so Ray of Sunshine Foundation is an organization she told me about. They are an organization that was started by a mother who lost her daughter to suicide when they were in high school. And they are all about suicide awareness. They go to schools, they go to churches and other organizations. I did reach out to them in hopes that they would look over my story, or I could collaborate in the future, but I never heard back, so we're hoping that maybe they will, contact me in the future for something. She helped me find some books to look at, helped me with marketing, and her biggest advice when it came to being successful was just ask. I thought you had to be invited to go to book signings, or present, or do something, appearances, but she told me that all of the appearances she's been, she's just asked to go to. And I got a book signing coming out that way. So that was a really good piece of advice for me as a successful author, like I'm hoping to be. The other thing I took from her is adding additional pages to my book, which was extremely smart. So here are my care pages I have on the back. This is the melting snowman. You're gonna see this one a little bit throughout, but because the dimming light was my focus, that is the one I'm gonna talk about the most. But the blue and the white snow, that is the care pages for the melting snowman. I kept the same format and the same idea, just because I wanted to keep the series consistent. I'm gonna pass this around in case you guys wanna look at it as I talk. But on the care pages, I just have local resources for Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, and I also have the national resources, the hotline. And then on the other care page, I have just a few tools you can try. Some of them are the same for the anxiety, just because a lot of the tools are the same for anxiety and depression. Sorry, my mouth is like super dry. Okay, so here is an interview I conducted with an old classmate. If you look up in that corner, that is Lindsay. Lindsay is an old classmate from high school. We were not friends, but we were acquaintances. And when I did her interview, because she's an elementary school parent of a few, I found out that she actually committed suicide, or she tried to commit suicide in high school, and I had no idea. Again, we ran in the same circles. She left for the rest of the year, and I didn't know why, and I didn't question it because I was, involved in my own life. But she talked about the challenges coming back to school, not knowing if people knew, and how she had to handle that after what she did. And she's also a parent, she has personality disorder. One thing I learned from her is that, I'm not saying there's none, but there's not a lot of children's books that deal with personality disorders. And when she has an episode or she has some type of symptom that comes out in front of her kids that are young, she doesn't know how to explain it, so she actually uses a postpartum depression book to try to explain her disorder. So that is something I'm considering doing in the future for my own children's book series, along with her help or someone who has a disorder since I don't have it. And then another person I talked to was Amy. Amy is also a graduate student presenting today. I didn't talk to her over the phone or in person, but she did help me a lot over email, and she helped me fill out a form that I had, because she is like a children's book expert of some sort. I believe she has like a degree in psychology. I don't know, yes, okay. And she gave me a lot of titles to research, so that was like a lot of children's books to look at. She gave me some ideas for different treatments to look into and helped me with my storyline. These are the writer workshops I talked about earlier. This is at the Tone Bookstore. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. I know I threw that name out a lot in my classes. But Jeremy Spencer is the Tone Bookstore. That is in Mount Washington. But he has these free writer workshops on Thursdays, and he usually has a guest that comes in to talk about a certain topic. So Kristen Simmons, she's a writer. She could not for anything get published. And eventually she finally got there, and she has 18 novels now. And so she talked about having hope and characterization. Jeremy talked just on pure questions from the audience. So he gave us a lot of information on NaNoWriMo and other different techniques in writing stories. And then Sarah Hawley, she was actually a part of a publication and talked about the difference of self-publishing and traditional publishing, which is nice because I was self-publishing this book. Now, I didn't learn a ton from my story because they actually talked a lot about novels, and this is a little bit different, but it did help me with my writing in general, so I wanted to add it. So Emma is my freshman, and she's also my illustrator for my children's book, The Digging Line. Emma agreed to do it. I noticed that when we were doing some activities in English, she had really great art, and she wanted to do it. Her family was ecstatic. It's going to be great for her if she continues doing art in the future to have this portfolio. And so Emma, anything that you see that is the jack-o'-lantern story, the pumpkin story, that is all done by Emma. And she will be going on the radio with me in the future, so I'll let you know at the end about that. So then I go to phase 2, and phase 2 is just looking at some similar books that might address mental illnesses, having at least a second draft, starting my traditional research, that's not just those interviews, and then starting my presentation slides. So these are the books I looked at the most. These all address some type of mental illness or some type of self-esteem. So Ricky the Rock That Couldn't Roll, that was one of my favorites about depression. My Monster Me was another really good one about anxiety that I liked. And then this one in the top corner is actually only pictures, which I thought was really interesting. So I tried to use some of that inspiration, and a lot of these actually came from Amy, so thank you. But I tried to use a lot of that as my inspiration for my story. And then I know this is gonna sound silly, but a lot of my information also came from TikTok. Credible people, I promise, okay? Everyone has a bad taste in on TikTok, but a lot of writers have gone on there now, and they talk about different techniques that they use. So I actually went to Izzy B and Carol Kim Books, if you wanna look at them. They have a ton of different suggestions, so I used a lot of their suggestions too. But the biggest thing I noticed was that when you're writing a children's book, there's usually 3 trials or obstacles. The first one they never make, the second one they don't get past, and then the third one they do. Unfortunately, I had some formatting issues with my book, so I was not able to publish it like I had planned. I'm currently working on that. I've never put a book together before, so this is my first time. The book that you're seeing now is one done by a professional illustrator that I found on TikTok. So she put the book together. So I'm working on that, but since I didn't have it, I wanted to show you some pictures. These were all done by Emma. So in the beginning, Jack the Jack-o'-lantern, creative name, I know. He is getting, like bullied, right? Like people think he looks funny because he has a weird smile, right? And his light's dimming. And then you see him in the mirror, he's actually the worst critic of all, right? He's the worst one. He gives himself the meanest names. But then his friend Piper has an idea on how to make his light start glowing brighter again, because his light has been dimming when these things are happening. They go to see the scarecrow of their pumpkin patch, and he gives him a scarf because they think that the wind is the thing making this light go dim. But Jack, as you can see, was not satisfied. The scarf didn't matter because the wind was not blowing on his light, it was his emotions. So then Piper has another idea. She knows about a wizard, a magical wizard who gives out pumpkin seeds, and sometimes those pumpkin seeds help pumpkins and sometimes they don't. And the pumpkin seeds are a metaphor for, or a symbol for antidepressants. Sometimes they don't work for everybody. Poor Jack, it didn't work for him. So she knows, she has another idea, because she's Piper. And she knows a witch, right? This witch gives him a magical serum, it's supposed to be a truth serum. And it's supposed to help him tell what's actually wrong, like why is his light going out? And when he goes outside with her, he sees a whole bunch of different pumpkins, all different sizes, all different colors, even some squashes in there. And the squash shares their story about how they feel, and Jack realizes that he also feels the same way and he's not alone. So Jack shares, and the witch admits that the true serum wasn't a serum at all, and it was just the courage he already had to share. And so now, every year on Halloween, Jack goes back to the witch, and he goes back with all his pumpkin friends, and his light's still dim, but every year when he goes back, it gets a little bit brighter. So that's the basic storyline. So I talked about my book. Let's talk a little bit about high school again. And I know I wrote a children's book, but again, the main focus is let's get to high school, right? And you can use a children's book in high school. I've taught with children's books before. So what are schools currently doing? And the answer is not a lot, all right? So I tried looking this up a lot. I couldn't find a ton of information on what they're doing, so I had to use my inside resources. I went to my counselor at my school and asked, and unfortunately, it was kind of what I expected, right? Teachers go through a training on one day for a few hours, along with our school shooting training, and sexual harassment, and everything else we have to do. Students watch a 1-hour video that is done by adults talking. It's very heavy, hate to say it, but it's boring, and kids are not interested in it most of the time. They have counselors on site, and our school has an outside therapist who can come in if students sign up for her. So that is something, but I don't feel like it's enough. I will say that I do know a few different schools that I've subbed at that have some different things. I know I've been to a school that they have these like round talks in homeroom, and that tends to be really awesome. They give them a topic, and through that topic, they can discuss their feelings or their experiences, but that only works if you have something like a classroom community. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention said that 27 states require suicide prevention training for students at schools. That includes Kentucky. 15 encourage it, and only 12 have prevention and intervention trainings required, which should be all 50 states. So, suicide is actually the second leading cause of death in ages 10 through 34. Again, it should not be that high up there. So the Kentucky Youth Risk Behavior Survey that was given out to Kentucky schools, 15% of high school students, which is 1 in 7 students, considered suicide in the last year. 17.4% of middle school students in Kentucky, which is 1 in 5 students, considered suicide at least one time in their life. According to Alyssa Briggs, who's a psychiatrist, suicide increased 32% between 2009 and 2018. 20% increased in high school and 20% increased in middle school. I want to bring us back to this picture, right? And just think about the fact that 1 in 7 students have considered suicide in a year. Again, I know that's not just my class, but I have 22 people up here, right? That's at least 3 students who would be gone if they committed and were successful. Here are some treatments that I looked at. For time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will talk about bibliotherapy and art therapy. This is a picture I found that was really cool to describe art therapy. It's where you can get your emotions down on paper in some way, or art, so it can be pottery. And bibliotherapy is what I'm trying to do, using my book to talk about hard topics. Here are the activity pages I have, where I try to add in those therapies. So for the jack-o'-lantern story, I know it's a little funny, but basically I have an idea where you can get Play-Doh, orange Play-Doh, form Jack, and then you can form his emotions as he goes. The snowman is a stress ball. These are just different changes I made between the first and final draft. I made Jack die originally. That was like the biggest mistake. So he lived. I published my snowman story. I'm working on the other one. Unfortunately, the survey results did not work that I did for a Google survey, so I couldn't use it. And in conclusion, I know that the psychiatrist, Dr. Fletcher, he says 50% of people who kill themselves actually have some depression. The other 50% is from self-esteem. And I agree with that. I know my work site is here, but my last page is actually this. It has my bookstore signing if you want to go on Saturday. It also has my John Lennon Air appearance on case 1 and 7 with Emma. And I have a QR code if you want to follow my socials and see where I go after graduation.